The rail pressure sensor is designed to convert fuel rail pressure values into voltage signals for the engine control unit. The ECM supplies a 5-volt reference and low reference to the sensor. Varying signal voltages are returned to the ECM based on fuel pressure within the rail. When the fuel pressure is high, the signal voltage is high. When the fuel pressure is low, so the signal voltage is also low. The diagnostics for these codes will run only when the engine is running and the battery level is greater than 11 volts. A P0193 will be recorded if the sensor signal voltage is higher than a predetermined level. This may be caused by a short to voltage in the high reference circuit, an open or short to voltage in the low reference or signal circuit. Having a battery maintainer connected during any electrical checks will guarantee stable voltage readings. Disconnect the harness connector at the fuel rail pressure sensor and attach a meter set on volts between battery negative and the high reference terminal. Turn the ignition on and record the voltage. The expected value would be between 4.8 and 5.2 volts. Anything over this would be interpreted as a short to voltage, while a 0 volt reading may indicate a short to ground or open circuit, but this will set other DTCs. If the initial recorded voltage reading from the high reference circuit indicated substantially higher than 5.2 volts, a short to voltage will be the cause. With the meter connected between battery negative and the high reference terminal in the fuel rail pressure sensor harness connector, turn the ignition off and disconnect the ECM. If the meter reading is still higher than expected, the short to voltage is in the harness between the two connectors. If the meter reads 0 volts with the ECM disconnected, the short is in the ECM or a circuit from the ECM. To isolate between the two, perform a continuity test between the high reference terminal at the fuel rail pressure sensor and all other terminals in the ECM. If no fault can be found, the short to voltage is internal to the ECM. With the meter connected between the low reference terminal at the sensor connector and battery negative, any reading seen indicates a short to voltage. Turn the ignition off and disconnect the ECM. Turn the ignition on while watching the meter. If the meter still displays battery voltage, then the short is in the harness between the two connectors. If the meter display changed to 0, the short is in the ECM or a circuit from the ECM. Perform a continuity test between the low reference terminal and all other terminals in the ECM connector. If there is any continuity found, the short is in that circuit. If no continuity was seen, then the short to voltage is in the ECM. With the short to voltage ruled out and the meter connected between battery positive and the low reference terminal, a meter reading of 0 indicates an open in the circuit. Move the meter lead to the ECM low reference terminal and back probe. If battery voltage is now seen, the open is in the harness between the two connectors. If there was no change on the display, disconnect the ECM and check the low reference terminal and ECM pin for corrosion and tension. If no fault is found, the open is internal to the ECM. With the ignition off, disconnect the fuel rail pressure sensor harness connector. Set the meter to volts and connect between battery negative and the signal terminal in the harness connector. You should see 5 volts displayed with the ignition on. No reading indicates an open in the signal circuit. Move 1 meter lead to the ECM connector and back probe the signal terminal while watching the display. If the correct voltage is now shown, the open is between the two connectors. If the meter still displays a lower than expected value, disconnect the ECM and inspect the signal terminal in the harness connector and ECM for corrosion and terminal tension. If no fault can be found, the open is internal to the ECM. A short to voltage would be observed, with a reading of 5 volts or greater displayed when back probing the signal terminal in the sensor connector and battery negative with the ignition on. Turn the ignition off and disconnect the ECM. Turn the ignition on while watching the meter display. If there is now no voltage reading, the short is in the ECM or a circuit from the ECM. To isolate between the two, perform a continuity test between the signal terminal at the fuel rail pressure sensor and all other terminals in the ECM connector. If no fault can be found, the short to voltage is internal to the ECM. If, when the ECM was disconnected, the meter still displayed voltage, the short is in the harness or the sensor itself. After disconnecting the sensor, any voltage reading displayed will isolate the fault to the harness. If the high reference, low reference and signal test OK, the DTC can only have been caused by the sensor. Continuous training will guarantee effective diagnosis will be reached in minimal time. Thanks for watching.